Hello there. I think we can all agree that the exchange of knowledge is beneficial. In fact, I think we could agree that learning, advancing science, knowledge, and information, and then the dissemination of that information upon others, is in fact a benchmark of any modern civilization, human or otherwise. Now, before the rise of the United Federation of Planets, humanity, of course, had been a divided people who had learned to work together, cooperate, and form the United Earth. The United Earth went on to become part of a sort of precursor, crude version of the Federation, if we want to call it that, at least in terms of its alliances and working in cooperation with others. That would be the interspecies medical exchange. Now, in brief, this was a collection of races who had agreed to share knowledge, where development of medicines, life-saving technologies and techniques would be pioneered by one but then shared freely with the others in order to recognize mutually that these were beneficial to all and not necessarily needed to be unique to one. Now, it was true that because different species have different needs and different medicines work differently on different races, it was necessary for doctors to understand when they are treating a patient who is not of their own species, to perhaps understand that the drug that they are about to give them might actually kill them rather than just numb pain. So the interspecies medical exchange was built and created to further the knowledge of races' interactions with one another and to better advance the field of medicine. It was also in place to research and develop new techniques and technologies and medicines to help all of its member states and even beyond. We know for a fact that humans, Vulcans and Denobulans were prominent members of the organization, and although Klingons were not members, they were interested in the organization and did try to steal information whenever possible. Several jointly run facilities sprung up as a result of this organization, notably Cold Station 12. Cold Station 12 seemed to be a predominantly human constructed facility but was jointly administered between humans and Denobulans. The station itself, perhaps being of human construction, but working and cooperating with a number of Denobulan vessels which worked like sort of space ambulances. The facility itself was constructed upon the surface of an asteroid and burrowed into the core of it. Its location was somewhere in the Beta Quadrant and had a staff of between 10 and 15 people at any given time, made up of a mixture of human researchers and doctors and Denobulan researchers and doctors. It, however, was a facility that you weren't freely allowed to approach because the nature of this facility was to store some of the most virulent diseases, pathogens, toxins, and other such dangerous things for isolation and study away from any major population. In other words, if something got out, it was only going to affect the station, not anybody else. It couldn't affect the dead asteroid in which it was situated. In the 2130s, a human geneticist by the name of Arik Soon was one of the head researchers of this facility, even having his own office. But he eventually left because, well, he was crazy, and he stole some of the more dangerous items that were kept at the facility in cold storage, which were approximately 1,800 human embryos that had been genetically modified and enhanced to create human augments in the late 20th century. These were leftovers from the eugenics wars. He believed he could gestate them and create a better human race, and he wanted to study them. Of course, he was crazy, but I do have a biography of that individual already up on this channel. Please check it out. Now, of course, Cold Station 12 would survive him, and 20 years later we do know that Dr. Phlox, the chief medical officer and Denobulan of the NX-01 Enterprise, had also previously worked at the facility for several months, developing a relationship with the station's chief researcher, currently by this point, even keeping a continued correspondence with him over the years after he had left. Dr. Lucas was a human doctor who was the current head of administration and research at Cold Station 12 in 2154, when Arik Soon decided to come back with his children, a group of human augments who had stolen a Klingon bird of prey, in order to get the other embryos that were stored at the facility. The embryos, to be clear, had been kept there because humanity didn't know what to do with them. Technically, they were human beings. They were living creatures. there was arguments that they should just be destroyed, but other people said that they were innocent and shouldn't be judged for the crimes of their kin. Bear in mind, these embryos, although human, were not quite human, so people painted them with the same brush as the augments like Khan, who were also a product of the same genetic techniques that had been used to create these embryos. In other words, they were the same species. They were human, but not quite. They were a little bit more. But they were still living creatures, and no one could bring themselves to simply destroy them, so they were kept in storage so they could figure it out at a later date. But here we are, 100 and plus 50 years later, and they still didn't know what to do. Soon believed he did know what to do. They came for the embryos. The NX-01 would also arrive at Cold Station 12 to attempt to prevent the augments from taking the embryos. Unfortunately, they would fail, but Malik, little Khan wannabe, decided to release all of the containment fields in the facility and flood it with all the pathogens, killing everyone there to cover their escape. Luckily, they were able to prevent this, and the station was not destroyed as a consequence or left unusable due to mass contamination, basically space biological Chernobyl. But what exactly the facility was continued to be used like and how it was in the ensuing decades and centuries, we don't really know. We only know that the facility was built at some point in probably the 22nd century and continued on through the mid 22nd century and probably into the era of the Federation. But when it was decommissioned, if it was ever decommissioned or was still in use by, say, the 24th or 25th centuries, not entirely sure, or even if it was still in use in the 32nd century, either under the United Earth banner or still under the Federation or somebody else's. It's simply not clear, but it's obviously a place of good investment because, quite frankly, it's a good idea to take all the worst, nastiest, most dangerous diseases and things, and if you're going to study them at all, do it away from a populated world. Quite frankly, I think this is a stroke of genius. Keep them away from the population so no one's at risk. You keep a minimal staff there. If it does get out, the worst case scenario is a dozen people or so are dead. That's tragic, but it's better than millions, potentially more, being dead from the horrific things that got out here. The augment embryos were possibly one of the worst things that were kept there if they gestated and turned out like Malik and Khan to be monsters, which clearly they, proportionally, a lot of them did become, which is one of the reasons the things were never activated in the first place. And as bad as they were, at least they were still human, and humans can do some pretty horrible things to themselves and to others, as the augments who had hijacked the bird of prey would demonstrate when they took several of those pathogens away and tried to enhance torpedoes to turn them into biomolecular warheads, which would have killed countless millions of Klingons if they had actually been successful in their planned attacks. But Cold Station 12, in and of itself, genius idea of a facility. Burrowed deep into an asteroid, staffed by only a few people, kept away from major populations, and a good way of isolating in the vacuum of space all the most dangerous creations of the various races that were around, as well as the more natural diseases that exist but need to be studied and researched in order to develop cures and countermeasures towards them. But do you agree? Or do you think it would have been better to have kept a facility like this simply in a deep cold of Antarctica so it's easier for research, and maybe a little safer so that it's not as vulnerable out in deep space, as this was an unguarded, undefended facility, as the nearest ships nearby were typically hospital ships that were unarmed? All the same, we've reached the end of this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification icon if you want to see more videos like this one, because that's the real subscribe button, and the subscribe button, despite what it says, is lying to you. But hit it anyway. With that said, thank you for watching, and bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.